Point 1. Introduction. Hi everyone, especially to Alistair and your team for enabling and facilitating this interesting platform. It has been a tough time for all of us, especially those of us who depend on real-life interactions, the social scientists. I'm glad to finally contribute something here. I am definitely not as presentation literate as my predecessors here are, but I hope this effort will suffice for now. The podcast interview Alistair did with my father, Arthur, provided much of the background of our Blokrans model and how we have gone about sustainably growing our business and property size in this arid thicket environment. I will elaborate slightly here with my own personal thoughts about the thicket and engagements with other forum stakeholders. But first, just a quick background about myself. I matriculated in 1990 at Muir College in Uitenhage. After military service in 1991, I went to Stellenbosch University where I studied agricultural science and economics. When we accommodated the first international hunter on Blokrans in 1978, my dad had already recognized the value wildlife had in sustaining this arid land, but he needed help with the hunting. So I immediately completed my professional hunter's license course after my studies in 1996 in order to help develop our hunting enterprise, which my dad had called Blokrans Safaris. I also completed a BA in environmental management at UNISA between 2011 and 2015, as I realized and wanted to understand what the growing environmental movement was all about. And I especially wanted to know why there seemed to be so many philosophical viewpoints and disparities around the management of our environment and society in general. I learned a lot of interesting things in this time as I delved into online emotions, especially how the internet was affecting society and how perceptions were formed and was changing our ways of thinking. I have also been involved with wildlife ranching and part of Wildlife Ranching Eastern Cape since its inception more than 10 years ago. My father was also Southern African Wildlife Rancher of the Year in 2016. I am also currently a Vice President of the Professional Hunters Association of South Africa and the Provincial Rep for the Eastern Cape of FASA. Point 2. My observations and experiences. I noticed from a young age how some areas in our district and even on the home farm were denuded or degraded of veld or thicket. This was apparent to me not only in the arid thicket but other thicket areas too. The areas around Naga, Patterson and Addo have very large areas where thicket was removed to make way for grasses. My father explained to me, as he has confirmed in his podcast with Alistair, that the damage in our district was caused many decades ago when farms were much smaller and when there was much misinformation and ignorance about the carrying capacity of this specific habitat. Rainfall varies dramatically in our region, and this affects the type of thicket and the management we have, of course. I put a lot of thought into this, and I even dare say it caused a certain anxiety in me too. What should we do to counter and restore the degraded habitat? I always put my mind to endlessly. Plant spekboom. We did this a lot, and I remember how we pushed spekboom and water on wheelbarrows from a very young age when we came home from boarding school on weekends and school holidays, and I realized this was not going to be an easy job. I noticed many things in that time, especially how the herbivores just love eating newly planted spekboom. Frost killed new spekboom cuttings long before it affected old existing plants. I won't go into too much detail about all these observations here, but there are many. There had to be a better way. It became very clear to me that the sustainable utilization of our indigenous wildlife seemed like a great way to add to my father's responsible management of the only other species that made extensive farming viable in this district, which are goats. We see how the citrus industry is expanding, and I always find it ironic that farming practices that require sustainable use of the habitat, the businesses who depend on it, would be blamed for the habitat degradation, unless, of course, the managers didn't understand sound economics and good business practices. They were never going to make it. The alternative of not sustainably utilising natural habitats and thicket is clearly then to not have thicket, a very important point to consider. At Stellenbosch, I did an agricultural economics assignment on the topic of utilising wildlife as a farming enterprise, much to the amazement of my lecturer, Dr. Loubser, who was very interested in this, and he had never seen this added as a farming enterprise by any of his students before. After university and my early years on the farm, I decided that I would really try build on my dad's hunting enterprise, and with my brother Francois, who had also just finished his BCom at the then UPE, we decided that working on getting international hunters would bolster the value of our wildlife resource, especially the Eastern Cape Kudu, our flagship species here. We felt that this was a sound, self-funding and sustainable strategy to give value to their habitat, our beloved arid thicket. In 1999, Francois and I headed over to the US and Europe to visit the big hunting shows, and we haven't missed a year since 2021, which sadly was the first year we never made a trip overseas to market due to COVID-19 restrictions, something that has changed the eco-tourist landscape in the short to medium term. There will be many challenges still, but I have noticed that international hunters are willing to travel more so than regular tourists do. This gives me hope for the value of wildlife and the economy that it sustains. Any business, especially in agriculture, needs to diversify. Without diversity, you are putting yourself at major risk. COVID-19 and tourism hit a home run on the vital importance of business diversification, especially if you are involved in tourism. Farming and agriculture in South Africa is about business, making profits, and many people and families' livelihoods are dependent on these businesses. It goes without saying that these businesses need to be sustainable. We don't rely completely on any one enterprise, namely livestock production and wildlife ranching. The one subsidizes the other, and this has ebbed and flowed over the years. There were years when the moe prices were very low, and hunting sustained the farming businesses too. Again, the ability for the business to be able to grow has been vital in its sustainability. It would be irresponsible to suggest that a business shouldn't diversify and be able to grow. Point 3. Notes on the SWEP and Thicket Forum presentations. I managed to watch a few of these presentations now after the turmoil of this last year. A lot of repair and frantic makeup work was required. 2021 has almost been a tougher year for us than 2020. Crime has spiraled out of control. Theft of just about everything is almost the norm now. It has so far been one of the driest years in history in our district too, and this is according to records going back to 1950. It really has been a tough year, folk. The workshop organised by Matthew Child and Sandby at Zooburg in April to deliver feedback of the SWEP initiative, which we were part of, was interesting and much needed too. I was very happy to take some of the student researchers hunting too. Understanding and seeing these concepts in real life is vital. Much of what I can say has already been discussed by some of the presenters. Matthew made very good points with great graphics by Alta de Vos. Leanne Kant made a good case for the value of wildlife in helping protect natural habitat too. Thank you also for all the other students. Sarah Skuman gave an accurate account about her engagements with landowners. As landowners, we found their engagements very encouraging. Their objectivity was appreciated. Value that sustainable hunting and utilisation in general brings to wildlife and their habitat on remote areas can't be stressed enough. The bottom line is that there is still so much data and information that is required about the wildlife industry. We need to remember that this industry in South Africa is a world leader, and it pretty much developed itself without much government assistance. an excellent case for market-based solutions. Jan Vlok's presentation was very interesting. The diversity of thicket is just mind-boggling, and we are all still just learning. You can imagine that the folk 100 years ago knew absolutely nothing about all these types of thickets, if we are only now just starting to understand how sensitive they really are. Just look at the thicket in the Addo Park. The areas where thicket was cleared are still the same, and this is what is supposed to be a natural environment. A friend of mine was recently in the Kruger Park and showed me the damage and destruction he saw there. My own studies and research over the years delved into the psychology about the public's opinion and emotions around hunting and wildlife utilization. And this brought me to the conclusion that we can't be too sidetracked by our own emotions and the anti-hunting narrative, which, with the advent of the internet and social media, has unfortunately become quite a toxic and polarizing, to say the least. The wildlife economy needs support from all levels of society. This can only be done through personal engagement. Our hunting and wildlife ranching associations and coalitions can't do it alone. The government is struggling just to maintain its own protected areas, so it will never be able to divert resources to protecting natural habitat on private land too. This needs to be done with the private sector, but the private sector needs an enabling environment to do so. Point 4. A broader mindset approach. Adding onto sustainable utilization principles to protect and restore habitat, there needs to be this broader mindset approach of sound economic principles that needs to be understood and promoted fully. Private property and the creating of an environment for successful ranchers and their businesses to grow is vital. I don't even need to go into the tragedy of the commons and the devastation it would cause in thicket, especially arid thicket. As my dad pointed out in his interview, and as I consider as the main leak in Mr. Bluchnoot's narrative, is financial inflation. If you are not growing, you are dying. Inflation is killing off our hard-earned savings, and it is reducing the viability of our once viable units, including farms. The environment to grow businesses and subsequently farm size is paramount. Our entire financial system needs a paradigm shift. Everyone talks about access to funding, but the inflationary effect is where our problem really lies. Habitat degradation is very much a symptom of inflation too. James Reeler pointed out that landowners expect at least 250 Rand a hectare per year turnover. This is less than 2% return, not a great investment at all. It's a tough life to farm here. James Bluchnoot rightfully pointed out that farmers can't be expected to pay for environmental services that includes restoration when they only contribute 2.4% of GDP, but must manage more than 50% of the land. We have a serious dilemma that is going to take a long time, if not longer, to restore than it took to damage. Farmers are already heavily invested in combating all sorts of rural problems. Escalating crime, labor, and droughts are just a few massive issues we must negate every single day in this real world of ours. Then there is the issue of climate change too, a phenomenon no one has the answers to. The only thing we can say for certainty is that there is more CO2 in the atmosphere now than ever before. If we will be able to change that is anyone's guess. Anthony Mills and AfriCarbon have a noble plan that we are part of as a pilot project too. Anthony pointed out that 1.2 million hectares of thicket needs to be restored by 2030. I admire this goal and really wish it could happen, and considering the financial implications and opportunity costs of pretty much eliminating herbivores of so much land. A quick calculation will show what the opportunity cost of 250 Rand per hectare for 1.2 million hectares over 10 years will mean to an already strained rural economy. But I really do hope that this AfriCarbon project succeeds. We really would love to see these degraded areas back to the way they used to look. Spekboom is just an absolutely fantastic plant. I love it. It's my favorite plant. Point 5, conclusion. We are in a situation where we have more questions than answers. A lot of factors need to be taken into account, right from grass or spekboom roots up, excuse the pun. Constant dialogue and engagement will be part of the process. It will take longer to restore degraded habitat than what it took to damage it. A classic Lindy effect. We are seeing that many renewable energy and other environmental restoration projects in Africa are being done on private land, especially in South Africa. We mustn't miss the forest for the trees, as the old saying goes. Currently, we still have a stable foundation to build on. We have hope, but we need to focus on reducing the wide range of barriers that are limiting us. My advice is also to join and continue supporting our various commercial stakeholder member associations such as Wildlife Ranching, FASA, SUCO, and your local farmer or agricultural associations, and to attend their meetings and events to get to know the people on the ground, the folk with skin in the game. The SWEP project is thankfully putting this important part of the process out in the open. Thank you and best wishes to everyone involved here, as we are all concerned in a healthy environment we all so desperately need. Goodbye.